On the morning of December 6th, reports in several Ukrainian and international media intensified about an incident that abruptly escalated the already tense situation in Kyiv. In a rehabilitation center in the south of the capital, there was an armed confrontation between members of the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Service (HUR) and soldiers of Reserve Battalion 178, an internal power conflict that erupted in one of the country's most sensitive urban areas and immediately triggered security alert levels. According to eyewitnesses, HUR units broke through the facility's gate-fired warning shots and detained 10 soldiers, some of whom were seriously injured. While intelligence forces barricaded themselves inside the building and blocked access for the army and police, the location was unintentionally exposed in the middle of a metropolis of millions that has been under constant threat from Russian drone attacks for months. Only hours after the first details of the incident became public, Ukrainian media reported that 3 Russian kamikaze drones had attacked exactly this center. The authorities have so far remained silent about the damage. Parallel to this, further developments intensified the geopolitical climate. Mysterious drones were said to have followed the government jet of Volodymyr Zelensky, while Russia targeted 153 sites with massive attacks on military infrastructure. In New Delhi, meanwhile, Vladimir Putin was received with military honors, adding additional political signals. Against this background, a central question arises: will the armed incident in Kyiv provide Moscow with a welcome pretext to strike Ukraine with even heavier blows? Welcome to our channel. The events unfolding around December 6th once again show how closely local incidents and large-scale geopolitical developments are intertwined. The armed dispute between HUR units and soldiers of Reserve Battalion 178 in Kyiv not only marks a security-relevant incident within the Ukrainian armed forces, but also falls into a phase in which Russia is significantly intensifying its military operations. At the same time, international tensions are increasingly coming into focus. Mysterious drones that allegedly followed the government jet of Volodymyr Zelensky raise questions about the security of foreign state visits. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is being received in India with ceremonial honors underscoring Moscow's strategic interconnections in Asia. The report that Russia attacked 153 military targets in Ukraine further illustrates how quickly internal instabilities can be seized upon and used by external actors. Meanwhile, European institutions, the United States, and international organizations such as the OSCE must confront the question of how they should react to the increasing tensions. Against this background, the question arises whether the incident in Kyiv is merely an isolated event or a symptom of an escalating situation that could have serious consequences for the further course of the conflict. How will Ukraine handle internal security challenges? And what consequences will the international community draw from the parallel military and diplomatic developments? On December 4th, the Ukrainian intelligence service HUR released initial information about the incident that had taken place in a rehabilitation center in the south of Kyiv. According to this, special units of the agency advanced to the building after a dispute had arisen over the use of the facility. According to HUR, a contract had been concluded with the owner of the center that entitled the intelligence service to be the sole user. But parallel to this, Reserve Battalion 178 is said to have concluded a separate accommodation contract with the clinic administration, a dual occupancy that ultimately led to an escalation. Upon the arrival of the HUR units, there was a violent entry, the gate was broken open. Warning shots were fired, and 10 soldiers of the Reserve Battalion were detained and injured. The HUR group then barricaded itself inside the building and refused access to both the military and the police. According to media reports, the situation remained unclear for hours, while more and more videos documenting the sounds of gunfire appeared on social networks. A spokesman for HUR later stated, "We defended our contractual rights." At the same time, representatives of the Reserve Battalion rejected the accusations and declared that they had been lawfully present in the facility. The following day, Ukrainian press reported that 3 Russian kamikaze drones had attacked exactly that clinic. The location and timing of the attack suggested that Moscow had exploited the previous exposure of the site. Amid these events, the Kremlin announced that Russian forces had struck 153 military targets in Ukraine, including bases, weapons depots, and infrastructure used for drone control. At the same time, media from Iceland reported that the government jet of Volodymyr Zelensky had been followed by unidentified drones during a visit to Dublin. Authorities confirmed the sightings but emphasized that the president's safety had not been endangered. The events of December 6 can only be fully classified against the background of the developments of recent years. Since the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war in February 2022, Kyiv has been under constant strain from drone attacks, sabotage attempts, and covert operations. Parallel to this, the Ukrainian security structures have experienced enormous personnel and organizational tensions. The rapid expansion of new brigades, the mobilization of tens of thousands of reservists, and the increasing fragmentation of individual units repeatedly led to overlapping competencies, particularly between intelligence services, territorial defense, and regular combat units. The incident in the rehabilitation center is therefore not a completely isolated event, but part of a longer-lasting development in which limited accommodations, competing responsibilities, and operational stress situations have repeatedly led to conflicts. At the same time, the strategic situation at the front is worsening since autumn. Russian forces have developed several offensive axes, including operations in the area of Upernivka, Holjai Pol, and Minoat. They rely heavily on kamikaze drones, electronic warfare, and artillery superiority to thin out Ukrainian defensive lines. The attack on the Kyiv Rehabilitation Center is part of a series of strikes with which Moscow has for months been deliberately targeting weak points in Ukrainian infrastructure. Added to this is the growing international dimension of the conflict Iceland recently reported. Mysterious drone movements during Zelensky's visit. The United States is under domestic pressure due to a lawsuit by the New York Times against the Pentagon, and India is strengthening its partnership with Russia through high-level meetings and symbolic gestures. The geopolitical context is thus shaped by shifting power axes, competing security interests, and an increasingly fragmented global order. Against this background, the question arises whether internal tensions like the incident in Kyiv will occur more frequently in the future, and whether Russia systematically exploits such moments to build military or political pressure. The analysis of the security-relevant and military aspects shows how multifaceted the incident in Kyiv and the subsequent Russian attacks actually are. From a tactical perspective, Russian forces once again used a pattern that has been emerging for months: the combination of electronic reconnaissance, precise kamikaze drones, and targeted strikes against exposed or overloaded sites. That only hours after the armed incident, 3 drones attacked the affected facility suggests that Moscow either had access to real-time information or opportunistically exploited every weakness in the Ukrainian dispositif. The attack is part of a broader pattern of Russian operations that also includes the 153 reported targets, among them drone launch sites, weapons depots, logistics, points, and energy infrastructure essential for maintaining Ukrainian frontline operations. On the Ukrainian side, the events reveal structural challenges. The overlapping of responsibilities between intelligence services, regular troops, and reserve units complicates operational coordination in urban areas. Experts have long warned that limited accommodations, high soldier workload, and a lack of clear command structures can lead to security-relevant incidents. This became particularly evident in Kyiv, a civilian object that simultaneously serves as accommodation for several military actors automatically becomes a vulnerable point in the event of conflict. In addition, the use of warning shots and the subsequent blockade of the site point to a drastic intensification of internal tensions that directly affect the country's defense capability. The international dimension of the events also requires a security policy assessment. Sightings of unidentified drones near Volodymyr Zelensky's government jet suggest that hostile actors are increasingly using hybrid methods to test or undermine the security of high-level delegations. Countries such as Iceland are already speaking of possible coordinated disruptive actions, while security authorities examine whether military or civilian systems for drone defense need to be expanded in the future. At the same time, Russian-Indian cooperation is gaining security policy significance. The ceremonially enhanced meetings and political rhetoric in New Delhi show that Moscow continues seeking reliable partners to strengthen geopolitical pressure points vis-à-vis the West. Overall, these factors make clear that Ukraine's defense architecture is increasingly under pressure through external attacks, the opponent's technical superiority, and internal frictional losses. The question now is whether the Ukrainian security institutions can adjust their coordination mechanisms to cushion both internal escalations and external precision strikes in the future. Internationally, the incident in Kyiv triggered a wave of reaction, some diplomatically restrained, others openly concerned. Representatives of several EU states declared that the internal escalation within the Ukrainian security structures must be closely monitored, as it could impair the country's defense capability during a phase of decisive Russian offensives. In Brussels, diplomats pointed out that Moscow's attack on the rehabilitation center was so closely timed to the incident that an opportunistic strike on a suddenly exposed weakness could hardly be ruled out. Meanwhile, the Icelandic Ministry of the Interior reported that the unidentified drone said to have followed Volodymyr Zelensky's government jet had been classified as potential hybrid disruptive actions. At the same time, it was emphasized that the president had not been in danger. In India, Vladimir Putin's visit caused particular attention. The ceremonial reception ceremonies and the symbolic presentation of the Russian-language Bhagavad Gita were interpreted by analysts as a signal of a deepening partnership, a circumstance that is making Western capitals uneasy. In parallel, the news that Russia had attacked 153 Ukrainian targets met with sharp criticism in Washington and several European capitals. The United States described the attacks as destabilizing, while NATO headquarters and member states again warned of increasing hybrid threats. The OSCE also reacted clearly. During a meeting in North Macedonia, the Ukrainian delegation referred to historical examples of failed appeasement policies and emphasized that what was needed was real peace, not a deceptive calm. Some Western foreign ministers expressed concern about reports that Russia was increasing pressure on various front sections simultaneously. In addition, a report by the New York Times, which is suing the Pentagon for massive restrictions on press freedom, caused further unrest. Commentators warned that the domestic political situation in the USA could reduce the diplomatic room for maneuver. Against this multifaceted background, many governments face the same question. What political and military consequences arise from the combination of internal Ukrainian tensions, precise Russian attacks, and growing global instability? In view of the events in Kyiv and the parallel Russian attacks, several possible scenarios are emerging for the coming weeks and months. In the worst case, internal tensions within the Ukrainian security forces could continue to increase. Should similar competency conflicts as in the rehabilitation center repeat themselves, there would be a danger that military resources urgently needed at the front would be tied up. Such a trend would offer Moscow additional points of attack to systematically exploit weaknesses and carry out further pinpoint drone strikes against exposed facilities. The moral strain on the troops could also grow if the impression solidifies that internal disputes are impairing operational capability. A second scenario would be a stabilization of the situation. Ukrainian authorities could revise their coordination mechanisms after the incident, define clear lines of responsibility, and regulate the use of civilian buildings by multiple units. If successful, the risk of future escalations could be reduced. At the same time, however, Ukraine would have to respond to Russian precision attacks by decentralizing critical locations, strengthening electronic jamming systems, and expanding air defense at urban points. International partners, including EU and NATO states, could provide additional support in drone defense signal intelligence and training. In the best-case scenario, diplomatic developments could open new room for maneuver. If talks between Western actors and Russia directly or indirectly lead to a de-escalation of individual front sections, Ukraine could reduce internal reform pressure and concentrate resources on protecting strategic cities. However, at present, there are few signs of such a dynamic. The hybrid activities against Zelensky's government jet, Putin's high-level meetings in India, and the continued Russian offensives all suggest a continued worsening of the situation. Given this constellation, it remains open whether Ukraine can address its structural challenges in time and whether Russia will use the combination of internal instability and external vulnerability to further expand its military operations. Which direction will prevail? Escalation stabilization or an unexpected diplomatic turn? The events surrounding December 6th illustrate how closely internal tensions and external threats are intertwined in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The armed clash between HUR units and Reserve Battalion 178 in Kyiv was far more than a local incident. It exposed structural weaknesses within Ukraine's security architecture and gave Moscow, only hours later, the opportunity for a precise drone strike. At the same time, Russian forces increased their pressure along several front sections and targeted 153 military sites, a clear signal that any instability on the Ukrainian side can have immediate operational consequences. Simultaneously, international developments cast the entire situation in an even more complex light. The alleged drone movements near Volodymyr Zelensky's government jet, the diplomatic signals during Vladimir Putin's visit to India, and the growing debates within the EU-NATO and the OSCE all underline that the conflict now extends far beyond Ukraine's borders. As the global security order comes under increasing strain, the question arises what lessons must be drawn from the recent events. Can Ukraine stabilize its internal structures in time, and will the international community find ways to contain escalations before they spread further? We will keep you informed about all developments. If you do not want to miss any of our analyses in the future, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment and share this video with others who are interested. Every interaction supports our work and helps draw attention to decisive security policy issues.